The late fall morning of 2022 in Fort Worth began with an unusual stillness around the Sycamore Pointe neighborhood. 3 unmarked police cars were parked quietly along the entrance to the apartment complex, engines off but dashboard lights still glowing, reflecting off windows still fogged with cold. Neighbors stood hidden behind curtains, watching every move of the tactical vested officers, silently taking positions around the grassy area where a Lexus had vanished 4 years earlier. Inside the Mobile Command Center, Detective Mira Langford was reviewing the dog-eared case files. She had read them hundreds of times since being reassigned the investigation. The glow of the screen illuminated the determined face of a woman who had spent nearly 2 full years lost in the mysterious labyrinth known as Silas Monroe Vance. She took a deep breath, her hand still tightly gripping the GPS report, the piece that had sent everything in a completely new direction. At 7:32 a.m. the door of the silver pickup in front of her opened, and officers immediately moved in. Garrett Sloan Drayton, a firm voice cut through the frigid air. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance of Silas Monroe Vance." Witnesses later said Garrett's hands trembled slightly as he slowly raised them, but his face remained strangely calm, as if he had always known this moment would come, only not after all these years of silence. Before we dive deeper into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love journeys in search of forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. On a late fall night in 2018, Fort Worth was wrapped in damp cold and the murky yellow glow of streetlights stretching across empty roads. The air felt almost frozen, broken only by a faint wind rustling through the sparse trees of the suburbs. In that stillness, Silas Monroe Vance stepped out of his friend Harlan Cruz's small house where the two had talked until nearly dawn. The porch light fell across Silas's tired but calm face before he opened the door of his dark-colored Lexus and got in. The engine started, its sound blending into the quiet of the neighborhood. Then the car slowly rolled away from the wet curb. The road back to Sycamore Pointe Apartments was one Silas knew by heart, a series of silent turns and curves past low buildings and the man-made lake in the center of the complex. But that night Fort Worth felt different. Thick mist made the lights reflect strangely, and the silence stretched so long that near and distant sounds blurred together. As Silas drove into the complex, the golden streetlights hung overhead, and the dark lake lay still beneath old trees. A Ring camera mounted on the porch of an end-unit apartment captured the last moment anyone ever saw Silas. Instead of turning right toward the main parking area, his Lexus suddenly veered, sliding onto the wide grassy patch beside the lake. The headlights cut through the thin fog, sweeping a long beam across the gray water before the car disappeared from the camera's view. There was no sign of sudden braking or turning back, just gone, as if it had slipped into the darkness. Minutes later, Silas's mother received a brief call from him. The connection was broken and full of static. Only his voice could be heard mixed with engine noise and wind. He tried to say something about the car veering off course, but the words were cut off, swallowed by noise, then silent. The call ended abruptly, leaving only confusion and unexplained worry. By morning, Silas didn't show up where he was expected. His family called dozens of times, but got only the cold message, unable to connect. Hours passed, yet the Lexus was nowhere in the parking lot. No texts, no phone activity, no sign he had left the complex, or met with trouble along the way. That unnatural silence quickly turned into spreading panic among his family. By noon, with every attempt to reach him failed, and no one knowing where Silas had gone after the car slid onto the grass in that final camera clip, the family had no choice. They went straight to the Fort Worth Police Department to report that Silas Monroe Vance was missing. Part 2. Initial search of the apartment complex, 1,000 words. The moment sunlight slanted through the windows of Fort Worth PD headquarters, the desk officer looked up at the sound of the door and saw Silas Monroe Vance's family rush in, every face etched with panic and strain. One glance was enough. He knew this wasn't minor. The trembling mother placed a short description of Silas on the counter, while his brother tried to summarize what had happened the night before. The officer wrote down every detail in the first report. Silas left a friend's house near dawn, never came home, no contact, and the last trace was ring footage of the car veering onto the grass at Sycamore Pointe apartment. The strange circumstances were enough for him to immediately alert the nearest patrol unit to head to the complex and check the scene. As soon as the report was filed, officers arrived at Sycamore Pointe and began work at what was considered Silas's last known location. They started with the grassy area where the Lexus appeared in the Ring video. Faint tire tracks were still visible in the soft dirt, but not clear enough to follow. Investigators knelt to examine the surface, measuring depth and direction of the skid, but everything only confirmed the car had moved onto the grass, and then nothing. No deep ruts leading out of the complex, no tracks toward the building. The trail seemed to end the instant the camera lost sight of it. From the grass they moved to the lake edge right beside it, the spot the headlights had swept across before vanishing. They searched the bank with high-powered flashlights for signs of a car sliding into the water, crushed grass at the edge, or anything floating on the surface. But in the afternoon light, the lake was perfectly calm, undisturbed, with no oil slick that usually appears when a vehicle sinks, and no bent grass, suggesting a car had plunged in. To the naked eye, the area looked untouched, as if nothing had happened that night. They didn't stop at the grass and lake. The team spread out to every interior roadway in the complex, examining every stretch of concrete, every turn, every small courtyard between buildings. The parking lots were searched thoroughly, no dark Lexus matching the description, no illegally abandoned vehicle. Not a single resident reported hearing a crash or seeing unusual headlights. Quick door-to-door knocks yielded nothing. Most people were asleep at that hour, and those still awake couldn't see the grassy area or lake from their units. Next in the initial sweep was the apartment complex's own security cameras. Footage was pulled immediately, but limited angles and poor quality made analysis nearly useless. The entrance camera clearly showed Silas driving in, but nothing after he turned off the main path. Cameras on the buildings had blind spots due to architecture, and the most promising ones were too blurry from reflected light or distance. All footage from midnight to early morning showed no sign of the car leaving the complex. The situation grew stranger by the minute. In a complex that wasn't huge, with plenty of roads but no maze, a Lexus and a grown man had vanished completely just seconds after disappearing from one camera. The search team documented every step, cross-referenced the timeline of Silas leaving Harlan Cruz's house, and replayed the blurry clip of the car's direction, but no logical chain emerged. Every avenue inside the complex dead-ended for lack of evidence. When the first sweep ended, police wrote a simple but heavy truth in the report. At Sycamore Pointe Apartments, the last place Silas Monroe Vance was known to be, there was no evidence he ever left, and no proof of where the Lexus was now. The search had begun with hope but was quickly boxed in by the total absence of traces. Sycamore Pointe became a blind spot where everything began, yet left nothing to follow. The investigation team left the complex with an uneasy, suspended feeling, and the complete lack of traces inside Sycamore Pointe forced them to widen the search to the surrounding neighborhood. With no results from the grass or lake, they shifted to the theory that the Lexus might have left the complex on a route the internal cameras missed. That possibility drove them to fan out along every road leading away, hoping to spot the car at any nearby turn or stretch. Main roads around the complex were checked first. Sycamore School Road runs straight through the area, connecting homes, convenience stores, and large parking lots. Teams walked the route, scanning the pavement for skid marks, broken headlight pieces, or scraped paint from a possible crack. Despite searching for the smallest clue, the road was suspiciously clean. No sign anything had happened the night Silas vanished. McCart Avenue was combed just as carefully, intersections with traffic cams, curved sections prone to accidents, and the area near Sycamore Creek where the terrain dips. Everything looked normal. Another team began pulling traffic camera footage from intersections within a several-block radius. Clips from midnight to dawn were reviewed in sequence, but no dark Lexus matching the description appeared. Every vehicle entering or leaving the area was clearly recorded, except Silas's car. This strengthened the likelihood that the Lexus never reached a main road, or passed exactly when a camera angle failed. When traffic cams offered nothing, police turned to nearby homes with exterior cameras. Houses with visible systems were noted and owners asked for footage. A few captured nighttime activity, but most only showed occasional passing cars or weren't aimed toward Sycamore Pointe. Some cameras only activated on major motion, missing the critical moment if the car didn't pass close enough. None of the clips showed a matching Lexus or any sign of Silas. The neighborhood was generally quiet, so almost no one was awake late enough to notice anything. The search radius expanded further to public parking lots, 24-hour gas stations and places cars commonly stop overnight. Lots near Sycamore School Road, all-night stores, and even the backs of larger buildings were checked. No vehicle had been left overnight with an unknown owner. No oil spots, plastic fragments or strange debris hinting at an incident. Empty fields, little-known side paths, and narrow single-lane roads were all searched in hopes of finding any trace of the Lexus. But no matter how deep into dead ends or vacant lots they went, every location revealed the same thing. Nothing noteworthy. Layer by layer, the searches made the abnormality of the case clearer. If Silas had driven out of the complex, the Lexus had to show up somewhere, on camera in a lot, or on the road. Yet every sign pointed to the car never reaching main roads and never being abandoned nearby. The total lack of witnesses made it even more baffling. In a fairly populated area, a car vanishing completely in the middle of the night with no one hearing or seeing anything felt impossible. By late afternoon, when the teams finished their sweep, they had to record that every possible road had been checked, and there was no evidence Silas ever left Sycamore Pointe apartment. The expanded search ended in the same emptiness as the one inside the complex. No traces, no leads, no witnesses, only a growing question about what happened after the Lexus disappeared from camera view that night. The expanded search around the residential area yielded no results, forcing the investigation team to return to the only anomaly they had, the dark lake surface right next to the grassy area where the Lexus was last seen on camera. Although there were no signs of the vehicle plunging into the water, and the lake edge appeared completely normal, the possibility that the car had slid into the lake could not be ruled out, especially since the terrain there was gently sloping and poorly lit. For that reason, the search team decided to take the next step, scanning the entire lake bottom using old-generation sonar, the only tool they had at the time. The rescue team, working with police, lowered a towed side-scan sonar device into the lake. It operated by emitting sound waves toward the bottom and recording the echoes that bounced back. The water surface was initially quite calm, with no oil slicks or floating objects. But that alone was not enough to confirm nothing was down there. The technicians began moving the device along the lake shore, carefully performing parallel scan lines. The sonar screen displayed varying bright and dark areas reflecting depth and mud density. However, the results were anything but clear. Signals were constantly noisy, return shapes were blurry, and it was impossible to distinguish rock from submerged tree stumps or possible man-made objects. Part of the problem stemmed from the nature of this man-made lake. The bottom had a thick layer of mud accumulated over many years that caused sound waves to return inaccurately. In addition, previous landscaping work had left behind numerous objects, such as wooden stakes, metal frames or sunken trash, causing the sonar screen to show chaotic reflection streaks constantly. Despite trying to adjust sensitivity, scan frequency and wave direction, the technicians still could not identify any shape resembling a vehicle. Unusual bright spots appeared and disappeared, extended dark patches had no clear edges, and all were judged as unreliable signal. Police also deployed officers to walk the remaining lake edge, checking for disturbed soil or grass pressed flat against the water that sonar might have missed. But the surrounding area was completely undisturbed, with no indication the car had ever gone in. Nevertheless, they continued additional scan passes because missing the possibility that the vehicle was buried under mud could derail the investigation from the very start. After nearly half a day of continuous scanning, the investigation team had to accept the initial assessment. The apartment lake showed no clear signs of a large object like a car on the bottom. However, the failure to locate the Lexus inside the apartment complex, or on surrounding roads, forced them to consider that Silas might have driven farther that night. With that in mind, they immediately expanded the search to larger lakes within a short driving distance. The next target was Echo Lake, a small but moderately deep lake, not far from Sycamore Pointe. If Silas had gotten lost or had an accident, the car could have ended up there. Echo Lake had more open terrain, and a wider, easier to observe water surface than the apartment lake, but underwater searching remained a major challenge. The sonar team deployed equipment from a rescue boat, scanning in a spiral pattern from the shore outward to cover every area. But Echo Lake's bottom had a different structure: thinner mud, more gravel and rock fragments that scattered sonar signals, creating countless small returns that forced technicians to continually re-evaluate images. After many passes, they found only a few small objects: old fishing chairs, rotten logs, and thick algae patches. There was no return matching the size of a vehicle. Lake Benbrook was added to the list next, a larger, deeper lake frequently used by fishing boats. Police hoped that if Silas had truly left the apartment in his car, Lake Benbrook might be where something happened. The sonar team had to coordinate with Lake Patrol because of the vast area. They divided the lake into search grids, scanning each section with different sonar units. However, Benbrook's bottom was equally complex. Numerous metal pieces, fallen tree trunks, and sunken trash were recorded. Strong return signals were usually rock or old lake bottom structures. There was no large uniform shape characteristic of a vehicle. The final results after checking both Echo Lake and Lake Benbrook were identical. No sign whatsoever that Silas's Lexus had ever sunk in these bodies of water. Every sonar return was logged, cross-referenced and ruled out without exception. Still, they all pointed to the same conclusion: no car was in any of these lakes. Upon returning to Sycamore Pointe Apartments to compile results, the investigation team realized that the three major search areas inside the apartment complex, the surrounding neighborhood, and the broader bodies of water, had yielded absolutely no useful leads. The Lexus had not appeared on roads, was not in the apartment lake according to the initial assessment, and was not present in the two nearby larger lakes either. At that point, the simultaneous disappearance of the car and Silas became an unanswered question, pushing the investigation into a more difficult trajectory than anyone had anticipated. The initial search efforts ended in heavy silence, and although police continued sporadic checks for weeks afterward, the disappearance of Silas Monroe Vance gradually faded into an unresolved void. The apartment lake had been deemed free of anomalies. The larger area lakes returned nothing. The Lexus and Silas simply vanished from every search map. The case remained open on file for a long time before interest waned, eventually becoming a familiar name on Fort Worth's list of unsolved missing persons cases. Time passed, and in 2020 the Silas file was transferred to the Cold Case Unit. The new investigation team, led by Detective Mira Langford, began reviewing all the old documentation, scene reports, photos of the grassy area, ring camera footage, old sonar results, everything the original team had tried to work with, but could not advance. Mira read every page carefully, and what held her attention longest was the 2018 apartment lake sonar log. The widespread noise patches on the old sonar screen, the indistinct dark areas, and the technician's note at the time that no large object observed became the point Mira felt needed re-examination. There was no evidence the car ever left the apartment complex. No camera captured the Lexus exiting. No reliable tire tracks led to the main road. One inconsistency kept repeating in the old files: if Silas did not leave, and the car was not in the surrounding neighborhood, then the vehicle had to be somewhere near where the camera last recorded it. That thought led Mira back to the apartment lake, the place once removed from suspicion because the old sonar had shown nothing clear. 4 years after Silas disappeared, Mira partnered with an independent sonar team, led by expert Ezekiel Thorne, who owned a new generation 1200 kHz multi-beam sonar, far more powerful, sharper, and many times better at penetrating bottom mud than the old equipment. They brought the gear to the apartment lake on a cold morning. The water surface was mirror still, not much different from how it had looked the night Silas vanished. Ezekiel lowered the device and began parallel scan lines covering the entire lake. Data appeared on the screen so crisp that Mira could clearly see bottom mud ripples, horizontal rotten tree trunks, and large rocks buried under sediment. Then in the western corner of the lake bottom, where the ring camera's view had once pointed before losing signal, an unusual structure appeared. Unlike noise patches or natural bottom shapes, this structure had straight lines and uniform sound reflection surfaces that made it stand out on the screen. Ezekiel adjusted scan frequency for greater clarity, and sharper edges emerged, forming a block shape resembling a car body. Mira stared at the screen, immediately recognizing that the size ratio almost perfectly matched a sedan, and if it was a sedan, it was very likely Silas's Lexus. To confirm, the team deployed an ROV remotely operated vehicle to the bottom. The ROV had high-power LED lights, a high-resolution camera, and small thrusters that allowed stable movement in still water. Nova Tremaine, the ROV operator, guided the robot along the shore, and then deeper toward the sonar-marked point. Footage from the ROV camera appeared on the laptop screen, first only mud and small gravel. As the light swept the target area, a dark metal surface gradually emerged from under thick mud. Nova adjusted the camera angle, and the distinctive Lexus grille appeared, half buried in mud, half showing the clear curve of the front end. Both Mira and Ezekiel fell silent as the car fully revealed itself under the ROV's flickering lights, confirming the Lexus had been there undetected for years. But the scene did not end there. As the ROV moved along the right side of the vehicle, the lights illuminated another shape, a blurry mass hiding under black mud. Nova brought the camera closer, inch by inch, and the shape became clearer. A human shoulder, then an arm, then the curve of a mud-covered skull. The body lay on its side just a few meters from the car, held in place for 4 years by gentle currents and bottom mud. There was no doubt the man on the lake bottom was Silas Monroe Vance. The team immediately halted all activity and reported to command. Fort Worth police sent additional personnel to seal the area, erect barriers around the lake, and secure the entire scene. The site was treated as a major crime scene because finding the body and car together raised a host of new questions. Why the old sonar never detected the vehicle, why there were no plunge marks from the shore, and what really happened the night Silas disappeared. The murky years of the case ended the moment the car emerged from under the mud, but the real investigation was only just beginning. As soon as the Lexus and body were recovered from the apartment lake bottom, the entire scene was turned over to the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office for examination. For Detective Mira Langford, the moment the car was pulled from the water ended part of the disappearance mystery, but bigger questions immediately arose, and only the forensic lab could provide the next pieces. Silas Monroe Vance's body, after years under lake bottom mud, was taken straight to the cold room for initial processing, while Mira and other investigators closely followed every note. Soren Haddix, a medical examiner experienced with heavily decomposed or long submerged bodies, personally handled the autopsy. He began with standard procedure, cleaning the body surface, assessing decomposition, recording obvious external trauma, and identifying areas needing deeper examination. Although the long time underwater had caused significant decomposition, bone structure and injury marks remained analyzable, and it was these factors that quickly revealed this was not simply an accident. Cracks along the right ribs were the first thing that caught Dr. Haddix's attention. They did not have the characteristics typical of frontal impact vehicle trauma, but instead resembled off-center force from behind or the side, a pattern inconsistent with the car simply driving into the lake and the occupant escaping on his own. In the chest and back areas, faint but identifiable injuries showed Silas had sustained heavy force before entering the water. Deep bruising under the skin, though faded, still showed the characteristic signs of blunt force impact. Most importantly, there were no signs the body had struggled in water, no water in the lungs in the typical drowning pattern, no biological reflexes normally seen when a victim is still alive while submerging. Dr. Haddix continued with the skull and facial area. A thin fracture along the left cheekbone indicated a strong blow from a hard object. Though not enough to cause instant death, it supported the hypothesis that Silas had experienced impact or assault before his body entered the water. If this had been a natural accident, such injuries are usually found alongside other signs like airbag deployment force, seatbelt restraint marks, or steering wheel trauma, but testing on the Lexus showed the airbags never deployed and the seatbelt was not in use at the time. Combined with data from the vehicle, where the rear of the Lexus showed denting from rear impact force, Dr. Haddix leaned heavily toward the theory that Silas had been struck hard by another vehicle. The rib injuries matched the pattern of the body being thrown forward in an unexpected moment, but not to the degree caused by driver-controlled collision. Additionally, the body's position several meters from the car on the lake bottom indicated Silas no longer had control of his body when it entered the water. A person still alive when entering a lake typically shows survival reactions, leaving traces in the nasal passages, sinuses, or lungs, but tests showed Silas did not inhale water into his lungs. Another key point was the condition of soft tissue in the neck and shoulder area. Microtrauma indicated twisting or jerking force, not natural body movement carried by water. These marks could occur when a vehicle is forced off course or when the occupant is thrown sideways by rear or side impact. On the right hip, Haddix noted a small but distinct fracture consistent with compression from a safety sensor or seat edge if the body was violently displaced from the normal seated position. Haddix's preliminary cause of death conclusion was recorded in the report: trauma from blunt force before entering the water, inconsistent with a simple traffic accident or intentional driving into the lake. Silas's body showed he had lost the ability to react before contacting the water, meaning drowning could not be the cause of death. This immediately shifted the case toward a criminal investigation, because the injuries could not have occurred if Silas had been in control of his driving, or if the car entered the lake without external force. Haddix's report was quickly sent to Mira Langford's desk, and she instantly recognized the importance of the details. Everything: the unusual turn onto the grass, the car vanishing from camera view, the complete absence of traces at the scene, and now the forensic conclusions, all pointed to Silas not entering the lake on his own. An external force had struck the vehicle, altering its path, and Silas was injured to the point of incapacitation. With the forensic conclusion, the case was officially reclassified from missing person to homicide investigation. For Mira, this was a major turning point. A case that for years had only silence and dead ends now had its first solid foothold, opening an entirely new investigative path to discover what really happened the night Silas disappeared, and above all, who was behind the force that sent the Lexus into the lake without leaving a single trace on the ground. Dr. Soren Haddix's forensic report dramatically shifted the atmosphere of the investigation. The case was no longer a mysterious accident, but had become a criminal homicide probe. Yet, just as Mira Langford and her team thought they finally had a new direction, they immediately slammed into a far harsher reality. Every lead appeared to stop dead right there. All they had were ante-mortem injuries sustained before entering the water, but absolutely no evidence indicating how those injuries occurred, who inflicted them, or why. When police returned to Sycamore Pointe apartments to deliver the autopsy results and ask follow-up questions, they hoped 4 years might have jogged someone's memory. A strange noise, an unfamiliar vehicle in the middle of the night, or an argument overheard somewhere. But apartment after apartment, every potential witness shook their head with the same answer: nobody heard anything, nobody saw anything, and whatever faint memories might have existed had long since faded. Many of the residents who lived there some could not be located, others claimed they slept too deeply or came home late from work and noticed nothing that night. No matter how hard detectives pressed for even the smallest detail, no one could offer anything useful. No witnesses, no accounts, no description of a second vehicle, and no one who had ever seen Silas being followed or in conflict with anyone. The technical evidence was no better. Silas's Lexus, though recovered, yielded no obvious additional clues. Every electronic system inside was severely damaged from years underwater. The airbags did not deploy, and the seatbelt was unbuckled, but that only proved the impact did not come from the front. It revealed nothing about the strength or precise direction of any external force. As for the suspected vehicle that delivered the impact, not a single fragment was found on the grass, the road, or in the pond. If a collision truly forced the Lexus off course, the investigative team expected at least some paint transfer, plastic pieces, or skid marks. Yet nothing existed. The scene was unnaturally clean, as if someone had engineered a collision that left zero physical evidence behind. Mira Langford also re-examined Silas's life before he vanished: relationships, job, daily routine. But Silas was simply not the type to make enemies. He had no debt, no neighbor disputes, no workplace conflicts or personal drama. Everyone who knew him described him as calm, responsible, and without any clear rivals or enemies. That made establishing a motive nearly impossible. There wasn't a single thread pointing to anyone who had reason to harm Silas. Cross-referencing local traffic accident reports yielded nothing. No collisions reported near the date Silas disappeared, no vehicles registered for suspicious rear-end repairs, and no body shops recorded front or rear-end work matching that time frame. Whoever applied the force had done an excellent job concealing their track. Digital data added nothing either. Silas's phone went dark abruptly, with no usable GPS history to reconstruct his route. No calls after the final one. Bank accounts showed no unusual activity. Everything resembled a blank white wall revealing no hints whatsoever. In the end, the investigation reached the state every detective dreads most: total deadlock. They had a body, a car, and a forensic conclusion, but no witnesses, no cameras, no weapon, no motive, no suspect, and no clear path forward. For a years-old case, recovering the body gave the family answers, but for the investigators, it was merely the starting point of a much larger maze, one with no obvious entrance, and at that moment, no exit either. In her phase summary report, Mira wrote one brief line: insufficient data to identify perpetrator or viable investigative direction. The Silas Monroe Vance case once again slipped into suspended status, this time not because a body was missing, but because everything that could identify who sent that Lexus into the lake on that dark night was missing. The moment the phase summary report concluding insufficient data to identify perpetrator or viable investigative direction was submitted, the Silas Monroe Vance case officially slid back into limbo. Despite recovering the body and determining Silas did not die by accident, the investigation could not advance another inch. In that deadlock, the file was presented to the review board for consideration as a cold case, long dormant investigations needing fresh eyes. The decision came in early 2020. The entire Silas Monroe Vance file was transferred to the cold case unit of the Fort Worth Police Department. The unit was smaller but specialized in old cases using modern techniques, new tools and tighter investigative methods than were available in. Transferring the file meant the case would now be re-examined from scratch, as if every prior conclusion was only surface level. The detective assigned the file was Mira Langford, a seasoned investigator known for meticulous work and strong analytical skills on complex, data-scarce cases. When Mira received the thick folder, she didn't rush to judgment. She started on page 1, rereading every line, every photograph, every old sonar report, and every statement taken in the first days after Silas vanished. Recovering the body and Lexus had resolved the missing person portion, but for Mira the priority was reconstructing everything that happened before and after the moment the car disappeared from camera view. During her review, Mira quickly spotted several critical irregularities in the original investigation, details overlooked or dismissed because the tools didn't exist back then. The first and most obvious was the apartment pond. It had been scanned with outdated sonar of poor quality and heavy noise, making definitive conclusions difficult. The search team finding nothing in 2018 did not mean no large object was present. Mira jotted in her notebook: old sonar, unreliable. Pond requires re-examination with new equipment. That was the first clue, making her suspect the Lexus may have sunk the very night Silas disappeared, but technology at the time couldn't detect it. The second irregularity was the vehicle's trajectory. The ring camera footage showed Silas's Lexus turning onto the grass in an odd direction. Mira compared the grass area, slope, turning angle, and probable paths. The trajectory did not match any natural route a driver familiar with the complex would take. This point wasn't deeply explored in 2018 due to lack of collision data or follow-up tire marks. Mira flagged it for closer review. An experienced driver doesn't veer into an illogical path without external force. Next, Mira reviewed the apartment complex camera system. Many cameras had limited fields of view, poor night lighting, or suboptimal performance the night Silas vanished. When the 2018 team found no footage of the Lexus leaving the property, they assumed it took an uncovered route. To Mira, that wasn't evidence Silas left the complex. On the contrary, it strengthened her belief the car never left the property at all. She also noted deficiencies in physical evidence collection. In 2018, technicians found no debris or collision marks, but that didn't rule out impact. A strike doesn't always leave large traces on grass, and absence of fragments at the scene wasn't enough to dismiss external force. After correlating every anomaly, Mira concluded the Silas Monroe Vance case wasn't simply lacking clues. The real clues had never been examined with the right tools and perspective. In her proposal for next steps, she wrote one short line: reopen investigation. Priority: rescan apartment pond with latest generation sonar. That decision marked a major shift. The case was no longer gathering dust in cold case storage, but had officially entered a new investigative cycle where every piece of seemingly outdated data could reveal a secret never seen before. From that point, Mira prepared for a full-scale review, a brand new investigation starting from the exact place Silas's Lexus had rested silently at the bottom of the pond for years, unknown to everyone. The final notes from her file review kept Mira Langford glued to the detail that had stalled the case for years. The blurry ring camera clip of the Lexus veering onto the grass. Every early theory hinged on that video, yet low resolution, poor lighting, and limited angle forced all analysis to stop at guesswork. Once the case moved to cold case, Mira knew today's technology was light years ahead. And with advances in AI, especially video enhancement, it was time to revisit footage long considered useless. Mira requested the technical unit pull the original quality copy from the 2018 archive and feed the video into the latest image processing system. The ring camera recorded in low resolution at the time, but modern AI algorithms could sharpen motion, remove light noise, and reconstruct reflections from light sources within the frame. As the system ran the enhancement model, Mira stood by the monitor watching layer after layer of the image restore. Initial grainy noise vanished, edges sharpened, and light from the vehicle headlights began revealing details the naked eye could not see. The first thing to emerge after clarification was a faint strip of light behind the Lexus, previously dismissed as distant apartment lighting. But when AI adjusted contrast, Mira realized it wasn't stationary light. It was two moving headlight beams. The light pulsed in sync with the Lexus's movement, staying close but not too close, exactly like a vehicle tailing it. Mira immediately ordered the system to zoom on the rear light area. The AI model analyzed color, beam pattern, and relative height above the road. Results showed the light signature did not belong to a low sedan or SUV, but to a mid-size pickup truck, vehicles with characteristically higher and wider headlight angles. When the motion sequence analysis ran, AI confirmed the path of those headlights perfectly matched the Lexus's direction just before it turned onto the grass. A chill ran down Mira's spine. For years the central question was, did Silas turn onto the grass himself, or was the car forced off course? Discovering a second vehicle following the Lexus right up to the moment it vanished from frame, opened an entirely new avenue. Mira had the system calculate relative speed between the two vehicles. The motion algorithm estimated the distance between the rear headlights and the Lexus, showing the pickup maintained nearly identical speed, staying close enough to track but never overtaking. That was not the behavior of a random car sharing the road. It was deliberate, and very likely directly tied to whatever caused the Lexus to veer onto the grass. As the video reached the instant the Lexus left the roadway and slid onto the grass, Mira noticed the rear lights also shifted direction, though the limited camera angle prevented a full view. However, the AI's light angle analysis showed a change consistent with the trailing vehicle also deviating from its original path. That made Mira almost certain the second vehicle wasn't just traveling the same route, it followed the Lexus right up to the edge of the frame. The AI went further, analyzing color reflections off the apartment walls and the footage. A faint silver glow appeared at the frame edge as the Lexus slid out of primary light. When Mira zoomed and boosted contrast, the reflected color became unmistakable, distinctive silver paint common on pickup trucks manufactured 2000. When the analysis finished, Mira leaned back in her chair, thoughts racing faster than at any point since taking the case. Everything pointed to one conclusion: Silas was not alone that night. A second vehicle followed closely, deliberately, on the same trajectory, appearing immediately before the Lexus entered darkness. The technical unit report landed on Mira's desk within the hour. The final conclusion line was concise. High probability of second vehicle directly involved in the event causing the Lexus to deviate from the roadway. Thus, after years of believing the case had hit rock bottom, the old blurry video became the new piece of the puzzle. The first piece proving a crucial truth: Silas did not vanish on his own. Someone was right behind him. The results from the AI-recovered video made Mira almost certain that the vehicle tailing Silas was no coincidence, and to solidify that theory, she needed to return to the case's most crucial piece of physical evidence: the Lexus salvaged from the apartment layout. In the original 2018 file, the car's prolonged submersion had rendered most of its electronics and interior worthless for investigation, but Mira knew the real answers always lay in the chassis and collision marks. Things no one in 2018 had the technical capability to analyze in depth. The Lexus was moved to the evidence garage, hoisted onto a specialized rack, and Mira brought in a veteran crash technician for assistance. The moment they examined the rear under powerful white lights, They spotted a long, faint but clearly curved dent across the back. Though years underwater had dulled the metal, this mark could not have been caused by natural elements. The indentation ran from the right side, flattened, then curved slightly left. The classic deformation pattern of a rear-end impact, not a front-end crash into a fixed object. What caught Mira's attention even more was the complete absence of horizontal scrapes, which would normally appear if the car had reversed into a wall or slid into a pole. Instead, the dent was uniform, indicating direct, steady force applied straight from behind. The technician measured the frame distortion depth and analyzed the steel structure. The deepest compression was on the right side, meaning the impacting vehicle struck at an angle, not head-on. This matched perfectly with the hypothesis that the pickup in the video had closed in on Silas and delivered a light but sufficient push to destabilize the car. When measuring the deformation angle, the technician concluded the collision wasn't violent enough to cause a severe crash by itself, but it was enough to better understand the Lexus's trajectory that night. Mira ordered a simulation using real-world data, the slope of the grass, the vehicle's weight, the direction of impact, and sliding friction on wet grass. The software reconstructed the path after the rear push. The result that appeared on screen left Mira speechless. The simulated trajectory matched the direction the Lexus took onto the grass in the Ring video with astonishing precision. In other words, if a vehicle struck the rear of the Lexus at an offset angle, Silas's car would slide along the exact path captured by the camera, veering onto the grass, heading toward the lake, then disappearing from frame. The technician continued examining the remaining paint flecks in the dent. Though most had been corroded by water, they recovered a few microscopic fragments trapped in tiny metal crevices. Using new spectrometry equipment, the lab analyzed the composition and found the color code matched the silver paint commonly used on mid-range pickups in the 2007. From two separate sources, the AI video and the collision evidence, Mira began to see a clearer picture. Silas was not alone. His car had been followed by a pickup from the main road all the way onto the grass. That vehicle had struck the rear of the Lexus, causing Silas to lose control and veer into the dangerous area by the lake. When combined with the autopsy, Mira identified three critical details. The airbags never deployed, proving there was no direct front-end impact. Silas being unconscious before hitting the water matched a strong rear collision. The collision report was completed that night with a clear conclusion: the rear deformation is consistent with impact from another vehicle. It is highly probable the Lexus was forced off course rather than voluntarily turning onto the grass. This finding was the next piece that brought the case one step closer to the truth, and at the same time convinced Mira that the driver of the silver pickup in the video hadn't just happened to be at the scene. They were part of the reason Silas Monroe Vance disappeared. That left exactly one vehicle, a silver pickup registered to Garrett Sloan Drayton, the same individual who had just surfaced in the cell tower data. The coincidences were now too perfect to dismiss. Garrett alone owned the right model, the right paint code, and his phone was present the moment the Lexus veered onto the grass. Mira added one more layer: 2018 registered parking space assignments. When she saw the spot assigned to Garrett was located near the road leading to the grassy area where Silas disappeared, she knew she had taken another major step forward. If Garrett's pickup left that space at the same time Silas entered the complex, it fully explained why the Lexus was followed and why the collision occurred completely off the main driveway. When Mira compared all these facts with the AI video and collision analysis, the picture became crystal clear. The Lexus was struck from behind at a height and structure consistent with a pickup. The silver paint on the Lexus matched the make and model Garrett owned. Cell tower data placed Garrett's phone inside the complex at the exact time. The Ring camera showed light and color reflection consistent with the truck he drove. All of it narrowed a suspect list that once contained dozens of people down to a single standout individual, none other than Garrett Sloan Drayton. One tiny paint flake, combined with modern technology, had become the crucial piece that brought Mira closer than ever to the person most likely directly involved in the death of Silas Monroe Vance. The paint evidence and the vehicle list from the apartment complex had already made Garrett Sloan Drayton the standout suspect. But for Mira Langford, that single link still wasn't solid enough to lock down a case that had dragged on for years. She needed another piece of objective data, something undeniable, unchanging over time, and impossible for human memory to alter or manipulate. That data was aftermarket GPS from vehicle tracking devices commonly installed by insurance companies or auto shops. Pulling GPS records from an old case isn't always easy. But Mira knew that many 2016-2018 pickup owners added tracking devices to lower their insurance premium. She immediately sent a request to the insurance company that had once covered Garrett Sloan Drayton's truck, attaching the court order and the reason for reopening the investigation. Verification took a few days, but one early morning, the email she had been waiting for landed in her inbox with the subject line, GPS data, vehicle registered to Garrett S. Drayton, 2000. The GPS data didn't just exist, it fully recorded the pickup's route on the exact night Silas vanished. What made Mira jump out of her chair was the coordinate of the most critical stop, a location right next to the grassy area where Silas's Lexus veered off in the ring camera footage. The GPS showed a short stop, only a few minutes long, but it lined up perfectly with the time the Lexus appeared and then disappeared from the frame. And that wasn't all. The road leading up to the stop showed the pickup coming from the main boulevard toward Sycamore Pointe apartments, using the exact same road Silas had taken at that moment. Then after pausing for those few minutes, the GPS recorded the truck accelerating away from the complex in the opposite direction, precisely when the Lexus vanished from the camera and Silas went completely off the grid. Mira cross-referenced the GPS data with the AI reconstructed video. When the two timelines were laid side by side, the match gave her chills. As the Lexus entered the complex, Garrett's GPS entered too. As the Lexus veered onto the grass, Garrett's GPS stopped exactly there. As the Lexus disappeared from the camera, Garrett's GPS showed him leaving the area. This was no longer in the realm of coincidence. It was a near-perfect match for stalking behavior. From the cell tower pings, the paint flakes, to the GPS track, everything tied the name Garrett Sloan Drayton to the night Silas disappeared. Mira dug deeper using motion reconstruction software to compare the pickup's speed in the GPS data with the Lexus's average speed in the ring footage. When the two graphs were overlaid, the result was unmistakable. The pickup was tailing the Lexus at low speed, maintaining a steady distance. When the Lexus swerved onto the grass, the pickup's speed dropped abruptly, exactly like a reflexive stop after impact. Then the pickup accelerated away, with no sign of checking the scene, behavior typical of intentional hit-and-runs, not accident. The data pointed to one critical conclusion. The moment the Lexus lost control and veered onto the grass was not an isolated mishap. It was the result of external force, very likely deliberate. Reconstructing the trajectory also allowed Mira to model the impact force. Based on the sudden speed drop and the direction of the veer, the software showed the pickup had approached from the rear right, delivering a force strong enough to throw the driver off, but not enough to total the car. It matched perfectly with the dent on the Lexus's rear and the injuries confirmed by the medical examiner. When Mira compiled all the GPS evidence, she finally understood that the most crucial part of the case had cracked open. Silas did not drive himself onto that grass. The sudden turn was caused by an impact from behind, delivered by a silver pickup. And that pickup wasn't just present at the scene, it stopped at the exact moment of the incident, then fled immediately. The official GPS report concluded with the expert line, "Vehicle route indicates a very high probability of human intervention causing the change in direction of the Lexus." Now Mira had no doubt left. The Silas Monroe Vance case was not simply a missing person, it was an intentional act, and Garrett Sloan Drayton's silver pickup was the key to the next layer of truth. The GPS data matching perfectly with the AI video and crash forensics left Mira Langford with zero doubt that every resource now had to focus on Garrett Sloan Drayton. To strengthen the suspect file, she started by digging deep into his residency and employment history around the time Silas disappeared in 2018. Because motive, if it existed, almost always stemmed from something directly tied to that period. Residency records showed Garrett had lived at Sycamore Pointe Apartments for about 6 months in 2018. He rented a small unit in the back row, not far from where the ring camera captured Silas's Lexus. At the time, Garrett worked as a contract maintenance tech for a local property management company, moving between apartment complexes to fix plumbing and light electrical issues. That job gave him access keys to multiple properties, intimate knowledge of Sycamore Pointe's layout, and awareness of every camera blind spot. A detail Mira flagged as significant. His residency history also revealed he moved out of Sycamore Pointe just weeks after Silas vanished. The original investigation never suspected him, so the move was logged as routine, but when Mira re-examined the timeline, it suddenly looked suspicious. His truck appeared in the GPS data at the exact time of the incident, then he bolted from the complex shortly afterward. Mira kept digging into Garrett's personal file. While working maintenance, he had been written up for a short temper and arguments with coworkers. One internal report even noted that Garrett had a minor physical altercation with a tenant over a repair dispute. None of it rose to criminal charges, but it painted a picture of someone quick to explode and poor at handling pressure, a risk factor Mira underlined. To explore any possible conflict between Garrett and Silas, Mira returned to Sycamore Pointe and tracked down residents who had lived there in Many had moved, but a few still lived in the area, or were reachable through old contact info. From scattered conversations, Mira gathered several noteworthy details. Silas had complained that a silver pickup often blocked the shared parking lane. Another resident recalled seeing Silas exchange tense words with a short-haired tall guy in front of the building, though they didn't hear the content. The descriptions of the truck and the man's build matched Garrett. One more resident remembered Garrett having a bad attitude toward anyone he thought parked incorrectly. That sparked a working theory for Mira. If Silas and Garrett had a minor parking dispute, then on the night Silas returned to the complex, seeing the Lexus cut across the grass might have set Garrett off, or felt like a challenge. A petty parking beef, seemingly harmless, can sometimes spiral into unpredictable actions in the hands of someone with poor impulse control. When Mira pieced together Garrett's full profile, the pattern became clear. He was present at the exact time and place. He owned a silver pickup that matched the paint in AI video. He had minor conflicts with residents and a hot temper. He moved out of Sycamore Pointe right after Silas disappeared. He knew the complex layout and camera dead zone. It still wasn't enough for charges, but taken together it formed a potential motive. A spontaneous confrontation, tailing behavior, a minor collision with major consequences, and a panicked cover-up that stayed hidden for years. For Mira, this was no longer suspicion. It was the first direct path to the person most likely responsible for the death of Silas Monroe Vance. The collected evidence on Garrett Sloan Drayton, cell tower hits, paint evidence, GPS, relationships and possible conflict with Silas was finally enough for Mira Langford to bring him in for a formal interview. Once the file was airtight enough that no coincidence could be called random anymore, Mira sent notice to his current residence in a billing and scheduled an official sit-down. It wasn't an arrest warrant yet, but it was a critical step to gauge his reactions, statements and demeanor against everything the team already knew. Garrett showed up to the interview room looking uneasy, trying to appear calm but constantly rubbing his hands together. Mira watched every micro-expression before starting. She didn't lead with the GPS or AI video. Instead, she opened with basic verification questions: where he lived in 2018, what his job was, and whether he remembered being at Sycamore Pointe around the time Silas went missing. At first, Garrett's answers were smooth. He said he only worked there a few months, didn't know Silas, and was definitely not involved in the disappearance. He claimed that night he was home alone, but couldn't recall exact time. That answer immediately raised a flag for Mira. People might forget a random night, but few completely blank out the night someone vanished from the complex where they lived and worked. Mira started weaving facts into her questions, gentle but sharp. She showed him a map of Sycamore Pointe and asked if he remembered the grassy area where Silas's Lexus veered off. Garrett gave a vague "I guess" but couldn't describe the layout. When she asked about the silver pickup he used to own, Garrett said he sold it long ago, and in 2018 only used it for regular work commuting. Nothing special. Then Mira placed the GPS report on the table. She didn't reveal its source, just asked directly, "Can you explain why your truck stopped exactly where the Lexus disappeared?" Garrett froze. It lasted only a split second, but it was unmistakable. He hadn't expected her to have that. After a pause, he muttered something about probably a GPS glitch, or someone borrowed the truck, but Mira had already checked the insurance records. No secondary driver was registered, and no theft report existed for that period. His answer was immediately logged as contradictory. Next, she moved to the crash forensics. She slid over photos of the Lexus's rear, pointed to the dent, and asked if he remembered scraping anyone while living at Sycamore Pointe. Garrett shook his head, said never hit anything, then added that his truck never had a dent. Mira didn't argue, but she knew a light tap strong enough to spin the Lexus wouldn't necessarily leave obvious marks on a high-frame pickup. It pushes, but doesn't deform easily. Then Mira laid out the timeline. Lexus entered the complex at 1:57 a.m. Garrett's GPS entered at 1:55 a.m. Lexus veered onto the grass at 1:58. Garrett's GPS stopped at 1:58. Lexus vanished from camera at 1:59. Garrett's GPS left the complex at... When Mira presented the timeline as one continuous sequence, Garrett suddenly leaned back in his chair and stared at the table. The silence that followed spoke louder than any statement. Garrett had no reasonable explanation. Feeling the pressure, Garrett tried to pivot, claiming he was just passing through, or stopped to check something, but the more he talked, the more tangled his story became. When Mira asked why he moved out of Sycamore Pointe just weeks later, he brushed it off as personal reasons, but couldn't produce any documentation or proof. The contradictions in his statements, his physical reaction to the GPS reveal, and his evasion about that night's movements, led Mira to note clearly in the record, suspect displayed signs of dishonesty and probable concealment of case-related information. Garrett left the interview room looking rattled. While Mira knew the final piece was now in sight, she had enough for the next step, and this time, it wouldn't be another interview. It would be preparing an arrest warrant. As she left the interrogation room and closed the glass door behind her, Mira Langford knew she had just crossed a critical line, from suspicion to certainty. Every piece of evidence gathered over the past week, GPS, cell tower pings, paint chips, crash forensics, contradictory statements, all pointed in one undeniable direction. Garrett Sloan Drayton had not only been present the night Silas vanished, he had been in the exact place at the exact time, and his actions matched perfectly with what had happened. There could be no more delays. Mira immediately returned to her office and began assembling every piece of evidence into a complete case file for the district attorney. She knew an arrest warrant would only be signed when the evidence formed an unbroken, irrefutable chain. The first pillar was the GPS data. Garrett's route matched the Lexus's path, minute for minute. Next came the AI-enhanced video. The light reflection, headlight height, and paint color all pointed to a silver pickup tailing Silas. Then the microscopic paint flecks found on the Lexus's rear bumper, an exact match for the paint used on Garrett's truck model. And finally, the contradictory statements, the gaps in his timeline, and the visible tension when Mira mentioned the nearly 300-page case file was delivered to the DA. A closed-door meeting lasted until evening. When Mira reached the timeline comparison slide, the room fell completely silent. Finally, the prosecutor nodded. The logic of the case had become undeniable. That same day, a judge signed the arrest warrant for Garrett Sloan Drayton on initial charges of homicide, second degree, and tampering with evidence. The next morning, a tactical team was dispatched to a building where Garrett was living. Mira monitored remotely via radio. As Garrett stepped out of his house and approached his vehicle, officers moved in from all sides. There was no resistance. He was handcuffed in seconds. Garrett asked in panic, "What did I do?" "You've got the wrong guy." But from the tremor in his voice and the way his eyes darted, Mira knew he understood exactly why they were there. Immediately after taking the suspect into custody, investigators executed search warrants on the house and garage. In the garage they located the silver pickup, partially repainted, but the new paint couldn't hide repair marks in precisely the locations that matched the damage pattern on Silas's Lexus. Forensic techs took paint samples, measured the dents, and quickly confirmed the match. Inside the truck they recovered additional evidence: a broken piece of bumper plastic hidden under the floor mat, a rag covered in dried mud consistent with the apartment lake bottom, a wheel lug tool still flecked with old silver paint. Everything was sealed and logged. Inside the house, they found an old document box containing a 2018 lease for an apartment at Sycamore Pointe, a resignation letter dated right after the disappearance, and a small notebook with unexplained dates circled. Each new item only made the case against Garrett stronger and clearer. When Garrett was brought to Fort Worth PD headquarters for booking, Mira watched through the two-way glass. He was no longer the calm man who had entered the interrogation room. He sat motionless, hands clenched together, eyes avoiding every reflection. That posture told the truth. The time had come to face the consequences. Mira felt neither satisfaction nor relief. She only knew that this years-long journey had finally reached the stage where justice could begin. Garrett Sloan Drayton was no longer just an anonymous former resident of Sycamore Pointe Apartments. He was officially a defendant in custody, his truck impounded, evidence sealed, and the full prosecution file being prepared for court. The Silas Monroe Vance case, thought to have sunk to the bottom of that lake 4 years ago, had finally reached an irreversible turning point. With Garrett Sloan Drayton in custody and the charging documents complete, the Silas Monroe Vance case officially entered its final phase, the criminal trial. This was the moment when every ounce of work by Mira Langford and the investigative team, from microscopic paint flecks to GPS data, from AI-enhanced video to crash forensics, had to withstand cross-examination by the defense and the scrutiny of the jury. The courtroom was packed on the first day. Silas's family sat in the front row, quiet but resolute. Across the aisle, Garrett was brought in wearing prison blues, face tight, hands resting on the table as if forcing himself to stay calm. Still, his eyes kept flicking toward Mira, then down again, never saying a word. The prosecution opened by reconstructing the timeline of the case, from the night Silas vanished, to the moment his Lexus was pulled from the apartment lake years later. Then each piece of evidence was presented like links in an unbroken chain. The prosecutor emphasized, a car doesn't slide into a lake on its own without leaving traces, and there is no evidence the victim was alive when he entered the water. He described the injuries in detail: cracked ribs, trauma to the chest and shoulder, a fractured left cheekbone, all sustained before the body entered the water. These are not injuries from someone driving himself into a lake. These are classic rear impact injury. AI-enhanced video. The prosecutor played the Ring camera footage restored by AI. The courtroom went dead silent as headlights of a pickup truck were seen following Silas's Lexus. Light pattern, height, direction, everything matched Garrett's truck. The silver pickup didn't just travel in the same direction. It followed the Lexus right up to the moment the car veered onto the grass. Paint evidence and crash analysis. A crash expert explained why the dent pattern on the Lexus was consistent with an offset rear-end collision from a pickup. Microscopic paint chips were projected on screen and compared to the paint code from Garrett's truck. The match was nearly 1. Garrett's aftermarket GPS. The heaviest blow came when the prosecution displayed the GPS data. Coordinates, stop times, speed, everything lined up with the moment Silas left the roadway. Garrett's truck stopped exactly where the Lexus left the pavement. No coincidence could be that precise. The prosecutor closed with a simple but crushing statement. Garrett Sloan Drayton followed Silas, struck the Lexus, caused the victim to lose control, become unconscious, and sink into the lake. Then he left without calling for help. Garrett's attorney tried to poke holes in every point, claiming GPS can be off by several meters, arguing the paint could have come from any silver vehicle, saying the AI video was interpreted to favor the investigation, stressing there was no direct witness to intentional contact. But each time, the prosecution countered with hard data. GPS error margin is 1 meter maximum. It didn't jump to the grass. Paint matched 97% with Garrett's exact make and model. Not just any silver truck. The AI video only restored original data. It didn't invent anything. The collision was proven by forensics. No eyewitness required. The more the defense spoke, the stronger the evidence appeared. The prosecution called expert after expert. Sonar technician confirmed nothing else was in the lake. Accident reconstructionist detailed the collision mechanics and trajectory. Lighting expert confirmed the headlight signature matched a picture. GPS technician stated the data could not be faked or altered. The jury took constant notes. Many nodded during the explanations. After 3 days of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The tension was so thick no one seemed to breathe. The judge asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood, holding the paper. "Yes, Your Honor." The room held its breath. "We find the defendant, Garrett Sloan Drayton, guilty of second-degree murder." Silas's family broke into tears. Mira closed her eyes for a second, letting her shoulders drop after years of carrying the case. And Garrett, the man who thought the truth would stay buried at the bottom of that lake forever, slumped in his chair, eyes empty. Justice had finally found its way back. The guilty verdict against Garrett Sloan Drayton spread across Fort Worth within hours of the trial's end. For many residents, the Silas Monroe Vance case had been fading into memory, but its explosive return, complete with the Lexus pulled from the apartment lake and a 4-year investigative saga, shook the entire community. Local media led with the story. Larger outlets from Dallas and Houston quickly followed. Evening newscasts opened with the same question: how could a car and a person be missed in a busy apartment complex for 4 whole years? Almost instantly, a wave of criticism crashed onto the Fort Worth Police Department. Residents were furious to learn that the apartment lake, the last place Silas was seen on camera, had been scanned with outdated sonar that found nothing, and no one had rechecked it in the 4 years that followed. News segments, editorials, and interviews hammered one-point gaps in the original search had forced Silas's family to endure unnecessary years of pain. Under pressure, Fort Worth PD held a press conference. A department spokesperson admitted that 2018 technology had been limited and that the lake evaluation was not thorough enough. A regrettable oversight. Though there had been no intent to neglect the case, the results clearly showed old procedures needed change. The department announced new missing persons guidelines that included every pond, reservoir, or body of water within the victim's last known radius must be scanned at least twice with different sonar equipment. Prioritize post-2018 technologies, AI video enhancement, GPS, and cell tower analysis, even within the first 48 hours. Create a dedicated missing persons response team that coordinates with dive units and independent experts when needed. Update scene assessment protocols to reduce over-reliance on a single device or report. Many residents saw these as important steps forward, yet they did not forget that Silas had taken 4 years to be found. Social media posts used his story to illustrate how dramatically modern technology can change an investigation, from new sonar and ROVs to AI video restoration and long-forgotten GPS data. Alongside the criticism, the Fort Worth community turned toward remembrance. A candlelight vigil was held at Sycamore Pointe Apartments, the place where the Lexus disappeared into darkness, and where Silas was finally recovered years later. Family, friends, current residents, and strangers who never knew him all attended. The candles, flowers, and photos of Silas, placing them along the lake's edge, as a symbol of a painful story that had finally been brought to light. Many shared that the case made them rethink how communities handle missing persons cases. One resident said through tears, "We lived right here all those years. None of us ever imagined Silas was still here, right beneath our feet." Others expressed hope that because of this case, missing persons' families would be prioritized and communities would rally more to help search. In the weeks following the trial, the Silas Monroe Vance case was discussed in training seminars and programs across Texas law enforcement. It became a textbook example of the idea: a cold case is not the end of the road, it's just where technology hasn't caught up to the truth yet. The final case report detailing every breakthrough by Mira Langford in the cold case unit was widely cited in modern investigative courses. Though Silas's family endured prolonged grief, they knew their son's journey had helped change the system, preventing countless future cases from repeating the same mistakes. And so, even though Silas's ending was tragic, his story became a resounding reminder to the Fort Worth community. Justice may come late, but it is still justice, as long as someone refuses to give up. The story of the Silas Monroe Vance case in Fort Worth, Texas is not just a true crime script, it clearly reflects real issues present in modern American society. Gaps in missing persons procedures, over-reliance on outdated technology, pressure on law enforcement, and the ever-growing importance of digital data in solving crime. Looking back at the entire search for Silas, from old sonar missing the Lexus in the apartment lake, to years of deadlock, to breakthroughs using AI video restoration, aftermarket GPS, and cell tower analysis, we can draw valuable real-world lessons, especially for communities across the United States today. First, the story reminds us that the golden hours in missing persons cases are critical. Silas's family did the right thing by reporting him missing the very next morning. And in real life, every individual should understand that delaying a report can drastically reduce the chances of recovery. This lesson is especially vital in the U.S., where more than 600,000 people are reported missing each year, and not all are found in time. Second, the case shows that technology is not just a supporting tool, it is often decisive. If in 2018 investigators had access to today's sonar, AI video enhancement, and modern crash forensics. Silas might have been located far sooner, and his family spared 4 years of despair. The takeaway for communities is clear. In the modern era, awareness of personal technology, doorbell cameras, vehicle GPS, location sharing with loved ones, can make the difference between life and death. People should proactively use these tools as a layer of personal protection, exactly as Silas's story has now proven. Finally, the case underscores the importance of community awareness and collective responsibility. If Sycamore Pointe residents had paid more attention to the silver pickup following the Lexus, or to earlier minor disputes, the outcome might have been different. In an American society where urban life often leaves people isolated, this case reminds us that staying alert and noticing what's around us doesn't just protect ourselves, it can save a life. From the details of this story, the biggest lesson is, justice can arrive late, but with community vigilance and the power of technology, we can close the gaps that turn tragedies into cold cases for years. Thank you for following the story to the very end. If you'd like to keep joining these unpredictable investigative journeys, like the Silas Monroe Vance case, please remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. See you in the next video, where we'll continue uncovering long-buried mysteries and the journeys that bring the truth back into the light.